Mark and Daze are going to share their reflections on COP26, the role of the individual in taking agency over the climate crisis, or kind of more broadly thinking about the impacts of consumption, which is really sort of underpinning the 9 Earths project. So I'll hand over to you both. Thank you.
So Sean, you're not asking very much for us then. You just want us to summarize 197 countries' negotiations and how we basically save the planet.
Yeah,
great.
You've got 20 minutes.
Yeah, that's what I thought. How do you want to do this, Daze?
Let's just have a chat. Let's just have a chat. What was your takings from COP, and how do you describe the experience that you went through?
So I'm exhausted. I mean, 2 weeks at COP. I mean, I described it on one podcast like being in the middle of the FA Cup final all the time. I mean, it's just the noise, the number of people. And for the first 2 days, everybody's running around like this, because they also put the leaders conference there as well. So all the world leaders turned up in the first 2 days, and that made everybody go completely mental. So let me summarize what came out of it. So there is some good news. So the first thing is the 1.5 degree target is still in the text. So the Glasgow Climate Pact, as it's called, has 3 big statements about 1.5 degrees. Tick. We have mentions for the first time of coal, phase down, not phase out, and also the removal of inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. Now, this may sound very strange, but in 30 odd years, fossil fuels and coal have never been mentioned in any of the climate agreements. Tick. The other thing is the pledges, or the NDCs, that countries make, according to the Paris Agreement, should be every 5 years. Now, it was delayed by 1 year because of the pandemic. So what happened this time is they turned around and said, however, we want greater ambition, so we want countries to put in new NDCs for next year, the COP, which will be in Egypt, the African COP. So it means that, again, this ratcheting up allows countries to be forced or persuaded to put in new pledges. Because the problem is the pledges we have now, if they're completely fulfilled, get us to 2.4 degrees to 2.8 degrees. Nowhere near the 2 degrees, and definitely nowhere near the 1.5 degrees. So that's all the good news. Bad news. The 100 billion that has been promised since 2009 from the developed world to the least developed world, so the really poorest countries, to help them decarbonize, still hasn't turned up. Okay, even though there was lots and lots of discussion over the 2 weeks, that's a trust thing, still hasn't turned up. Loss and damage, which all the developing countries were supporting, was blocked by the EU and the US on Saturday afternoon. By the way, it should have finished on Friday, but never does. And I think it finished officially something like 10 p.m. on the Saturday night. So that was lost as well. And the actual, as I said, the NDCs, the pledges, don't get us anywhere near 1.5 degrees. So that was my take on the madness that was COP.
Definitely. I like how you actually started on positives, because I don't know, from myself at least, I have such high expectation of like what we should be receiving. So I don't think it is a positive, you know, like 1.5, it's amazing that it's in the text, but then also if none of the, you know, commitments can actually line up to 1.5, it's a little bit like, you know, you might as well just talk and not fulfill, which is what our governments have been doing for donkeys of years. The climate crisis is a crisis that was born before I was even alive and was recognized before I was even alive. And now I'm kind of in the early stages of adulthood, and it still isn't taken seriously. And I feel like there was a lot of frustration around that in this particular COP, especially the exclusion of voices on the front lines in the global majority who weren't able to be present. There is something that, I don't know, like I feel that there is danger in pointing out positives of, you know, of a pack that's just not good enough. Especially if we have to kind of have that real conversation about where we truthfully are, and how to change so we can actually get, you know, the commitments that we need.
But I will go again with the positives. The most amazing thing is on the Friday, school strikes, massive protest around Glasgow. We thought it was fantastic. It was brilliant. It was, as always, really upbeat, really positive, incredible energy. We thought that was the best it was going to be. And then, oh my word, Saturday, the whole of Glasgow emptied and basically came onto the streets. And for me, I think that is the big change.
I am an activist. I was there on the Saturday shouting, being in the front of the migrant justice and climate justice block with my friends. But then there is this recognition of they can hear us, but they're still not listening. And I'm one of those, like, you know, I am a, do you know, like people say, like the pandemic babies are like a force to be reckoned with. I am a recession baby, a pandemic baby, and all of the above. You know, I have this crazy amount of resilience, but then also I don't like bullshit. You know, and there is something to be said about how do we not just have people being listened to, but how do we give agency for people to actually be able to take action. I want, you know, like the representatives that you're talking about, not just being there to talk, but being there to actively say, okay, this is what we need to do, and how do we get this in place in our agreements. And I think, I don't know whether it's just like my youthfulness, but I think it's a superpower because it makes me go, this is something that can happen and it should happen. So therefore, let's aim for that. You know, let's, you know, I just feel like after so many years of talking about the climate crisis, this literally being the 26th COP, which is so crazy. And it seems like even if you go through the histories of COP, they've been promising the same thing since the first, but just with different wording every single time. And it's not good enough anymore. I was speaking to my friend Fahana Yamin, who is an amazing climate lawyer, and she had worked on the Paris Agreement, the 1.5, but also has been attending 24 out of the 26 COPs. And she's saying, now it's time to get angry. And now it's time for us, especially with it being in Africa, it being with the places that are on the front line of the climate crisis. How do we make sure it's not just about being listened to, but it's about actually having them creating the actions that need to go forward?
Having that youth, okay, and having lots of, and the thing is, what is incredible is it's not just you, Daze. There's hundreds of you, thousands of you who are just as passionate, as energetic, as intelligent, and basically want change. It's also at a very different level as well. So I work with a lot of CEOs, and a lot of companies are going green, and they're trying to go as green as quick as possible. We have to check for greenwash, absolutely. But when I ask them and say, well, hang on, why are you doing this? Sometimes it's because their employees are basically being dynamic. But one of the things they come back to all the time is young people want to have a good job. They want to be successful. They want to earn a decent money, but they will not work for a company that they do not feel is morally or ethically on their wavelength. And so just by having a new generation that says, I'm sorry, I'm happy for you to actually run a company, but you can do it by saving the planet at the same time, you know, and just that complete mindset difference is forcing CEOs to go, well, how do I get the best of the best?
One thing that I really recognize is that the weirdest part is a lot of the countries in, you know, the exploited world, that's the term that I prefer to use, they are still using fossil fuels, but by far are they still emitting less than countries that are saying that they're dependent or they're moving towards renewable sources. So there is this question of like, there is such a difference in consumption from you know, the countries in the global majority and the Western world, and it's like, how do we address this? And even through the process of actively documenting my own life, I was like, you know, in the UK I live a pretty low carbon life. I'm very lucky to always get money back from my bills, because I am, you know, I am a stickler. My mum brought me up with the idea, like, you know, we sit in the dark till it's dark, too dark, you know, and that kind of idea. But then I'm like, in comparison to other people across the world, my lifestyle is not low carbon. My lifestyle is actually quite decadent. And it's like, how do we navigate the differences, and how do we like create like a level of like a standard of living that's equal, but also a standard of living that holds the accountability for us to decarbonize quicker.
One of the things I say in the book is the struggle we're going to have this century, which is, and I think your generation has a much better chance of being able to do this, is how do we actually think as a global species? Instead of just an individual or a family dynamic or a nation state, how do we actually think globally as humanity, and how do we actually think of actually managing our beautiful planet and our population? COP is performance art, okay? Because there's no legal binding on countries. So the really interesting thing is that countries go there, they perform, they basically bang their chests, etc. They, as you said, they want the best deal because they want to show off, etc. And in the final room, on the final day, it's usually a couple of personalities. It's the head of the Chinese delegation, it's John Kerry, it's the president, whoever that happens to be, Alashok this time, going around doing deals. It's all about individuals on the day, which is really scary. But it is performance art because it's all about performance, and it's all about saying we're going to do things. What then happens is that gets translated back into individual countries where they go, hang on, what did we agree to? How are we going to do this? How are we going to bring the policies in? It's also about how the global economy starts to gear up, which at the moment now, of course, renewables are much cheaper than fossil fuels. So there's a whole driving force there. Even though renewables are cheaper to build, cheaper to run, and therefore produce a lot cheaper electricity, to actually have a loan from a bank, if you're a developing country, it costs you more to have a loan for renewables than for coal, because the bankers still think it's riskier. And so therefore, you're looking at this as a financial transaction. You go, it's cheaper for me to borrow the money for coal-fired power stations than it is for renewables, which is madness.
How do we start to vision what the new system of collective change making globally can look like? And I think that's our aim, especially as the climate movement for next year. So we don't have another COP like this of where everyone and their mother is disappointed at the outcome.